Peckerwood Garden is more than a collection of plants. It's a convergence of philosophy, exploration, art, and passion. It's a path to tranquility for the eyes and the spirit. And it's a meeting of science and soul, where patience and boundaries were tested, along with the plants that found recognition and renewal. Peckerwood didn't start with a sketch. It's been an evolution for both land and man, since John Fairey, professor of architecture at Texas A&M University and a painter, was captivated by another art form.
I had been raised in a garden and in a little community in South Carolina that was there were lots of gardeners. There were probably 5 or 6 or 7 families, and the mother and father in these families both gardened. It was not just the wife doing the gardening. It was very much of a family thing.
But John wasn't a gardener in 1971 when a spring-fed brook on land in Hempstead, Texas, prompted memories of the magical places of his childhood.
At that point, I was teaching in College Station and had a painting studio in Houston. And the commute from Houston to College Station was just a little bit too much.
John's voyage into botanical art and architecture didn't start with an overnight epiphany.
It was a slow process. When I first moved, there were no trees on the front of the property at all. And so friends from Houston started giving me trees and plants and shrubs, this sort of thing, bulbs, all sorts of things. And of course I started planting them, and one thing led to another.
Another chapter began in 1983.
A tornado hit the garden and took out all the original trees that were here. We lost something like 15 big oaks in the garden, and something like 30-something pines came down. And I looked at it and I said, well, it's not going to cure itself by just looking at it. And so I got busy and started working, taking things out and moving things and changing. It changed the whole face of the garden, because what had been totally a shade garden immediately became a sun garden. And now the garden has gotten back and grown up again, and it's more or less a sun and a shade garden.
John recognized a chance to experiment with plants on a new level. Assisted by one of his students, Carl Schoenfeld, later they started Yucadou Nursery to populate home gardens with their discoveries.
And then in 1988, after the garden was pretty much established, Lynn Lowry, a very famous plantsman from Houston and from San Antonio, he had nurseries all over the state at one point or another. He invited me to go on a plant expedition to Mexico with him.
And John found another mission.
We'd go down one day and we'd spot a plant and say, well, this is a beautiful thing. We'll come back and collect seed on it 3 months later. We'll come back in 3 months and the goats had devoured the plants. And so overpopulation, overdevelopment is destroying a great many of the wonderful habitats in the mountains of northeastern Mexico. Lynn took us on 4 expeditions to Mexico, and on those 4 expeditions he taught us how to clean seed, talked about how to germinate the seed once we got them back into the country, how to get them across the border, and then of course after we found out that many plants would not do here that we were bringing in and trialing, we started, and we didn't start, but we got in touch with J.C. Ralston at the North Carolina State Arboretum in Raleigh. And he, in return, put us in touch with the University of California at Berkeley and an arboretum in Seoul, Korea. And we started shipping seed to these people. And they, in return, started shipping us their Asian collections.
With each rescue or experiment, they tested every growing condition. The plants guided Peckerwood's drafting board.
This was influenced by what I saw in Mexico. The old theory is if you don't like the plants you're looking at one point, go around the mountain to the east side, or to the west side, or to the south side, and you see totally different environments on each side of the mountain. And so I learned from what I saw.
As an architect and artist, John sought a pattern of beauty as well.
It's the transition from one area to another is so important. It's a lot of design and a lot of work to get that to happen. It just doesn't happen overnight. To me, gardening and gardens are about space. And of course, you introduce color, texture, layering of plants, this sort of thing. But it basically comes down to developing a wonderful space, a magical space, as I call it. And magical spaces occur when you have various canopies. It's about light. And in an open space, the light is totally different from in a space where you've got 5 canopies of trees, shrubs and trees.
As an artist who brings the work of other artists to Peckerwood through his Mexican folk art gallery and garden sculptures, John knows that significant beauty takes time.
Well, the thing is, you've got a multitude of things that are taking 12 to sometimes 20 years. I had a magnolia that I bought from Lynn Lowry in the early 70s, and it was 19 years before it flowered. But it was well worth the wait.
It's also about being patient through freeze damage, drought, or failure.
You just have to learn to live with these things. You have to be optimistic about them. There's something good about it, whatever happens. You could look over on this table over here and you can see tags, plant tags, and there must be 1,000 tags sitting on that table from the last 2 years. And these are things that did not make it. And so a lot of it is trial and error. It's the act of doing that's important. It's the act of planting the plant.
John is still experimenting, though Yucca has moved off-site.
We'll test them in the garden, and some of them we will sell when we have open days. People that come out to see the garden always like to take something home that they've experienced, and so we have a small greenhouse and a small nursery in operation.
He opens Peckerwood to the public throughout the year and by special request. To ensure that his work continues, he formed the Peckerwood Garden Foundation.
I'd put too much work into something that was going to be lost or sold and just pushed aside. And so I decided to form a foundation, and I did in connection with the national organization called the Garden Conservancy.
Volunteers and a few paid staff assist in Peckerwood's care, learning from the teacher who never stops learning. No doubt all of them ask, why the name Peckerwood?
When I bought the property, I had a dog named Beauregard and a very close friend named Maine. And so it comes from Auntie Maine. And Auntie Maine was married to Beauregard from Peckerwood Plantation in Georgia. And so it was sort of like it was a joke. And then it developed into later, people said, what are you going to name this? And we said, well, Peckerwood Garden. And then, of course, when Carl Shanefield and I developed Yucca Nursery, we came up with the name Yucca. And then we said, well, people need to learn to laugh and be happy about things. And the name Peckerwood at Yucca Nursery at Peckerwood Garden will certainly make people laugh.